Last week's announcement of Nigeria's former finance minister, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, and South Korea's trade minister, Yoon Yoon-hee, as the two candidates to make the final round of selection process for the position of the Director General of the World Trade Organization has elicited great applause, considering the fact that both candidates are women with great resume in trade, economic reforms, and advocacies. But more importantly, Nigeria, and indeed the African continent, is excited to have Dr. Okonjo-Iweala make the final list. With a consensus candidate set to be announced by early November, it is hoped that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala will emerge successful, and if that happens, what should we expect? I'm being joined by Dr. Okonjo-Iweala's media advisor, Paul Nwabuiku, to tell us. Good morning, Mr. Nwabuiku. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Good morning. Yes, thanks for having me. It's a very good time because there's a lot of excitement around her candidacy, and of course, she's come a long way.
Sure, I can imagine that,
I
Mr.
want to put in
Nwabuiku.
perspective what has happened.
Okay.
Yes, basically, she started out as Nigeria's candidate, and she became the West African candidate. And then from there, she became the African candidate. And along the way, I mean, you've mentioned the fact that the latest information is that she and the lady from South Korea are the last two standing. And it's very significant that the European Union actually backed the candidacy of Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, you know, even over the former British Secretary for International Trade, Dr. Liam Fox. So it just gives an idea of how much progress she has made. And I think it's something to be really, really happy about.
So what are the prospects of her emerging as the WTO DG?
Well, I think the prospects are at least 50-50 because you have two people left. But I suspect that it's even better than that. You know, like I just mentioned, she got the very important support of the European Union, you know, over the former British Secretary of State for International Trade, and that's really significant. You know, it just shows that, as the WTO said, both ladies, the lady from South Korea and Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, they ended up as the final two because, in terms of the depth and the breadth of their support, they were the best among the list. You know, and it just shows that having gotten to this point, she has a very good chance of emerging as the DG of the World Trade Organization. But of course, it's not over until it's over, you know. But the race has been a very arduous one, very tough. But I think it confirms, if any evidence was needed, that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is a very strong international player and is highly respected, you know, by a lot of important forces around the world.
Absolutely. All right, so what would her emergence mean for Africa and Nigeria in particular?
Yes, her emergence, it's in so many ways, it's excellent news for Africa. And not just Africa, also for the global south, which we belong to. You know, for a long time, countries, third world countries, developing countries have consistently complained that the rules of the global trade system don't favor them. You know, having one of our own up there means, at the very least, that there will be greater attention on the issues that concern us. You know, and specifically, it's important to note that right now, global trade in Africa, external trade in Africa is quite low. It's just stagnating around 5%, 3%. You know, and there's every cause to believe that the WTO's multilateral trade system will help Africa to make some good progress around that. You know, and there's also optimism that WTO, under her leadership, will take a stronger look at certain fundamentals, and that Africa will be encouraged to produce more and also to process more of what it produces, you know. But I want to emphasize that she's not going to be a lone player. It's an international system. There are all kinds of forces and countries and regions that are vital to the process. But what it means at the very least, like I said, is that there will be a greater focus on the things that concern us. We're not going to be like accidental players, but we're actually there because anybody who knows Dr. Okonjo-Iweala knows that she is very passionate about Africa. She's very passionate about the Global South. And her over 3 decades at the top levels of the international development have confirmed that. So basically, there's a greater focus on the things that are important to us as a region and as a country.
So tell me, what is the significance of WTO to the African private sector?
Well, WTO it's a very, like I mentioned, I mean, I'm sure you know a bit of the background. WTO was preceded by the GATT, which is the Global Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which was set up in 1948. It was one of the 3 organizations that were set up following the end of the Second World War. And the whole point of the objective is to encourage international economic cooperation. And of course, in 1995, the GATT, which preceded it, became the WTO. So it's 25 years old right now. And the job of the WTO is to encourage international trade, is to reduce trade barriers, is to ensure that there are fair rules and that those rules are also enforced fairly. And of course, it operates through agreements. It gets countries around to negotiate agreements, and then those agreements are signed and later ratified by the parliaments. So it's in charge of the international multilateral trading system. So, and basically means that the entire world is part of this process, And talking about the private sector, I mean, the private sector, the rules that are established by WTO affect not just countries, but also the private sector, And I want to also just make the point that she's also made, which is that of course, the coronavirus has led to a lot of challenges for the entire global system and the entire economy and all that. And the current focus is on producing the vaccine. And Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, who is the chair of GAVI, has made the point that it will be that the WTO and other players will have to focus more on ensuring that the vaccines that come out, that are produced, that the Nigeria and the other developing countries and the African continent are not left out, because she keeps saying that if nobody is safe with COVID, except everybody is safe and all that. So even the WTO is going to play a role in ensuring that whatever trade mechanisms, whatever economic cooperation agreements are put in place, encourage, also don't leave Africa behind. It's important to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, talking about the vaccine there, I know that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala has talked so much about it and then ensuring that whenever the vaccine is found, I mean, developing countries, underdeveloped nations should be able to have access to it. Now, if she becomes the Director General of WTO, what are the strategies or she is trying to put in place or she hopes to put in place to ensure that really these vaccines will surely get to countries that are underdeveloped?
Yes, the strategies are quite clear. I mean, the bottom line is that every country in the world is focused on getting the vaccines. And it's also a fact that the rich countries who are very powerful have the advantage because they have the resources and, of course, a lot of the capacity that exists for producing the vaccine also under their control. So it's important to have a system, it's important to negotiate, to have a system that encourages negotiation, And the first point to note, like she says, is that if everyone is unsafe, nobody is safe. Because if you have a situation where, for instance, the rich countries monopolize the access to the vaccine and all that, it will mean that the poor countries will not have access. And because in spite of the challenges posed by the coronavirus, the reality is that the world is interconnected, and ultimately the rich countries are going to also feel the pressure, because there's no way they can remain safe if other countries are not safe. So it's important to start with that argument, and it's something that she has made consistently in GAVI, within the African Union, the IMF, and all that. So the core strategy, if you like, is a conceptual one, it's a philosophical one, which says that, Mr. Rich country, you have to create a system. You have to encourage a system that also allows other countries to have access, because you can't be safe if other countries are not safe. So that's the very first thing. Then beyond that is to actually have the specific trade agreements, the specific economic cooperation agreements that would ensure that these things get into the hands of African countries as well. So these things are being worked on at different levels and all that. I know that, she's an ambassador for the AU. She also played a very strong role in the IMF response to the coronavirus and all that. So at those levels, a lot of strategies and structures are being discussed to ensure that the whole world has access to it.
Now, know that globalization and multilateralism have suffered considerable pushback in recent years. How does she hope to change this narrative and, reverse the situation?
Yes, you're right. I mean, even before the coronavirus hit, the reality was that globalization was under pressure, because a protectionist government emerged in the United States, America first and all that. And a lot of other conservative countries in other parts of the world, including Britain, are also focusing more on their internal issues as opposed to multilateralism. So the challenge was there even before COVID hit. And COVID has exacerbated the challenge. And but I believe that, the point, in terms of convincing the world, it's a very fundamental thing. The world, everybody benefits more when there's openness. Everybody benefits more when you have lower tariffs. Everybody benefits more when there's a system for negotiation and dispute resolution. And it's not going to be something that she will do alone, but I believe that we as Africans, that we have a strong, we are invested in the continuation of globalization and multilateralism and all that. And so the case has to be made, is being made consistently by people like her, but also elsewhere as well. Because a situation where we don't have access to other countries through trade and all that is not good for anyone. So my point is that it's not something that she's going to do alone, but it's something that she has, for over 3 decades, she has consistently pushed, something that she believes in. And the WTO position, when by the special grace of God she gets it, it's going to give her a stronger platform and, to really push for that to happen.
Right. You noted that, of course, that Africa's performance on the WTO is very poor. So what plans does she have to actually position Africa and indeed Nigeria to benefit more from global trade? Well,
her plans will be determined by the specific opportunities offered by the WTO position. And she is, I'm sure you spoke about her earlier, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is somebody who is a very conceptual thinker, and the whole point of international trade and cooperation is to ensure that the whole world understands that we all have a stake in this openness and all that. I mentioned the issue of the COVID-19, but there's also the specific issue of trade. Like I said earlier, external trade in Africa is quite low right now, and she has some very specific plans she has spoken about to ensure that Africa and other countries within the same economic bracket as Africa, the developing countries and all that, have that the rules encourage them to produce more. The rules encourage them to also process more, which of course, is the fundamental challenge of economic development in countries like ours and all that. So she has some very specific things that she's pushing, but it's also important to take note of the fact that before you can push Africa's interests, you must also persuade others that they also have a stake in encouraging those interests to become reality. And that is basically what's happening. The WTO is fundamentally about encouraging open trade. It's about the multilateral system. It's about negotiation. It's about agreements. It's about conflict resolution. And so all this will ensure that there are specific tools for ensuring that countries like Nigeria and that continents like Africa are not left out. And I'm sure she's going to maximize those tools.
Now, God willing, she succeeds as the Director General of World Trade Organization. So what kind of reforms should we expect in the short to medium term?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that the WTO is facing now is that WTO, to a large extent, is paralyzed because of the rivalry between the U.S. and China. And Dr. Okonjo-Iweala's campaign pitch has been anchored on the fact that before you can even talk about trade, people must sit down, and that she's the candidate who has the networks, she's the candidate who has the capacity, she's the candidate who has the strong leadership abilities to get the big and small players to sit down and discuss, and that's actually the core of this thing, because, and it's something that is really important, because you must first sit down before you can talk about trade, and that's the core of what she's about, really. And the fact that she has come this far shows that, to a large extent, the decision makers in the WTO and around the world are convinced that she has what it takes, what it takes to turn the organization around and ensure that these positives remain.
Sure. We're happy for her. We wish her all the best. Thank you very much, Mr. Nwabuku, for your time.
Thank you. And she's very grateful for the support of Nigerians. And like she said, we should all keep praying to the final whistle. Thank you very much for having me.
We wish her all the best. Yeah. Mr. Paul Nwabuku is the media advisor to Dr. Okonjo-Iweala. All right.